the advice that you quite commonly get with the clinical is fake it till you make it. And what I would say is that you don't need to fake it. You have every right to be in that room. You have done the requisite training. You've done the requisite years. You're just there to prove yourself, So you have the competence already, and let it shine through. You don't have to fake it. It's there already. And that, I think, was the big lesson for me.
Hello Dr. Humans, welcome back to the channel and today's very special episode, a conversation with Dr. Elaine Koh. Elaine successfully passed her RACP Clinical exam in 2023 and is now well on her way to becoming a gastroenterologist, and I could not be more excited for her. And in addition to being a gastro superstar in the making, Elaine is proactive and passionate about helping other doctors on their journey, especially when it comes to doctors sitting their clinical exams. In this conversation, we unpack how to study for the clinical exam in a way that supports your well-being and prioritises quality over quantity. We also touch on some beautiful mindset shifts for finding meaning in the process and stepping into your physician self so you don't have to fake it on exam day. So whether you're sitting this exam for the first time or you're giving it another go, there is so much wisdom in this conversation. I highly recommend listening to this as you go for a walk, go on a drive, you do you. But be sure to listen to this conversation from start to finish so you can take in all the juicy lessons that Elaine has to share. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dr. Elaine Koh. Welcome everyone. I'm so excited today. I am speaking to a very inspiring young woman and Dr. Elaine Koh. Elaine has a very special message to share and she is just a wealth of wisdom and knowledge, and I cannot wait to pick your brain today. So welcome Elaine. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Christine. So I'm from Melbourne and I've done BPT training here in Melbourne. And my experience I want to talk about today is failing the clinical exam the first time around and resitting it and passing it for the second time. Yeah,
and you are in that beautiful golden period of between passing your exam and advanced training. How have you been spending your time since you passed?
Yeah, I mean, just taking a bit of a break. So the job application bit was a bit intense, obviously, but I mean, now's the time that everyone says it's your time to relax, because it's the only time you get between the BBT and AT time to just be yourself a little bit and have just unclench a little bit.
Unclench is such a good way. And you've got your sights set on gastroenterology training, is that right?
Yes.
I cannot wait to refer every single person to you. It happens really fast, actually, when I have BPTs and then the next thing they become consultants. And then I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm getting so old. But it happens in a heartbeat for me. So it won't be long off. I'll be referring everyone to you. So
fingers crossed.
So, and I'm really grateful that you have decided to do this today, and it was very organic from you. So you had sort of approached me in recent months to sort of tell this story and offer this advice, and I'm interested in what motivated you to reach out to share your story and share your experiences.
First of all, I think this experience of failing the clinical exam or any exam is just a really lonely one. We don't talk about it, and you might get some condolences, but especially if you're from a smaller cohort, you might not have people just reaching out to you to say. It's just an incredibly lonely experience, and I wanted to put it out there to people who are experiencing this, that you're not alone. Lots of people that consultants and ATs alike have gone through this. We just don't talk about it enough. So I think that was really important to put out there. And the second reason is because I think, going through this experience and reflecting on it, I think that I learned a lot and I matured a lot as a physician in training. I think it might be helpful to other people to hear what I have to say, that might help their training as well.
It's incredibly helpful. And I think that's such an important point you make about the loneliness. But also I want to tune into this word, the word you just used there, which was condolences, because I think I talk about this a lot on YouTube and things like that, about how my impression of, like, in a consultant position looking at trainees, if someone does fail the exam, my automatic thought is, they'll get there next year. I don't think anything about that person. I'm obviously disappointed for them and with them, but it's more of a disappointment. I don't have any sort of feelings about them as a person or as a trainee. If we wanted to hire them one year, we want to hire them the next year. But I think when you are a trainee and there's a peer group around you, that might not be the experience. So I'm keen to hear your sort of take on how you experience that, because you use the words condolences and lonely. And I think it's such an interesting thing because, like you say, if we did talk about it more, maybe people wouldn't feel like that. But there is a sort of a awkwardness, or people find it hard to interact with it as well. So can you speak to that?
I think it is very hard to process the failure, and being, I guess the easiest way to put it is I think we're all very type A personalities. I think that's given in medicine. And coming from a place of being a type A personality where you've probably never failed anything before in your life, having this failure that is significant, is impactful, you have to do another year of training. It's a huge thing to process. And it also has the added awkwardness of everyone around you not knowing what to say to you to make you feel better, or to, say something that you think is meaningful. Essentially, yeah, that's what I felt. I think I was really lucky in my personal experience that everyone was very supportive. I had a very supportive, close-knit group of friends and family who were really helpful with that. And also everyone at work was very supportive. I didn't have anyone in the place I work make me feel as though I wasn't good enough for not having passed the exam, which I think sometimes you do encounter, other colleagues like that at work. Rarely, I think, nowadays. But I think that's more a marker of their immaturity as a physician in training, because every physician knows that not passing this exam is not a marker of how good a doctor you are, because you don't work under exam conditions. If you're at work and you can't remember something, you just look it up, and that's okay.
You said everyone was very supportive. What made you feel supported? So if I'm in a BPT cohort and I know someone who's failed, what should I do? What's the right way to let you know that you feel supported?
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge it if you're close enough to the person. Like, I wouldn't, be going up to someone that you didn't know. But what I found particularly supportive was that people just reminded me, I still think you're a good doctor. You're still competent. I would trust you to look after my family. This isn't a reflection of, you as a clinician or as a person. And, I know you're going to pass next year. So I found that particularly helpful because it was supportive. And even though I guess this part is a little bit more sort of maybe a bit vain or petty, but it's nice when people say, no, you should have passed, but it was bad luck. And that's sort of, it's nice to hear and it makes you feel better. But, you also, I think you also do have to sort of come to terms with the fact that you haven't passed, and that's a whole separate thing. But in the short term, it is nice to hear people say, oh, you should have passed. That wasn't very fair.
Yeah, and I'm interested in, because people can say that, but at the time when people were saying things like that to you, even though you felt supported, did you believe it when they said it to you, or did it take you a while to arrive at that same conclusion within yourself?
It did take me a while. Like, I think no matter how many people say it to you, you're not going to believe it right after you get your results, because your result, you think that your results are telling you one thing. But the more people say it, the more buffered you feel. Some of it is just time. Like, you just have to come to terms with it yourself. So even if a million people said it to you, you still need that 3 months to be like, yeah, actually they're right. I'm not a crap doctor. So I think it's both.
Yeah, and it's a really lovely message to even give that timeline. Like, it takes 3 months. You're not going to feel back to normal overnight or whatever. So can we go there? So coming to terms with things was something you mentioned. What is that process like? How would you recommend anyone in that position does process things and come to terms with things so that they can, get up and go again?
Yeah. I think it is a really hard thing. It's a really hard thing to go through. My personal experience is that I took the approach like I wanted to rip the Band-Aid off quickly. So I told a lot of my close friends from work, and I knew that the news would sort of slowly disseminate and trickle out, so that I would avoid being asked about it at work, because I would try to avoid that emotional reaction of feeling sad at work. Just sometimes you want to compartmentalize a little bit. So that was how I dealt with it at the start. I think over time, you really do have to come to terms with it. And how my approach to that is, number one, I took a break. And I think everyone will tell you the same thing as well. You just have to disengage from the exam process. You can't go from getting your results to 2 weeks later going back to long case prep. Like, absolutely do not do that. Because you need to disengage from that process of needing to excel all the time, because that's what you do. That's what you feel like when you walk into the room. You need to be the best. And you just need some time away from that. You need some time to be like, I'm okay. I'm just okay. I'm not the best. That's okay. And so I just traveled for a bit, even interstate, just to, remove myself from the hospital environment. Like, it's hard. It's still hard when you're at work. You're still in that environment. Just travel. I just like left the country, essentially, got out of here for a little bit. And I didn't start re-prepping until maybe about February or March the next year. So I gave myself a good amount of time off. It wasn't just like, okay, I'll go away for a week and start again. Like, I really, really disengaged mentally. The second thing that I did was just really psychologically taking that time to grieve. Like you said earlier, Christine, you're not going to be up and about again the next day. And you might expect yourself to feel normal, like, okay, this happened. Why can't I deal with it? Why can't I just get over it? And the way I saw it was like, it's akin to going through a really bad breakup with someone that you thought you might spend your life with, for example. Because all your expectations have been turned, head down, on the head, and your life is sort of in a disarray because you thought you're going on to AT training next year and now you're not, so you have to take that time to grieve, and I think go through those five stages of grief and just be supported during that time. And I personally found it helpful to have like some formal mental health support as well, and I would recommend that for anybody who might be considering it, because it was really helpful even in the short term, just to talk through it, to say my life is in absolute shambles at the moment because of what has happened.
And I think just to touch on what you had said in there, that issue with feeling like you need to excel and feeling like you have to come to terms with, first of all, that feeling of not being the best. I think that's such a great thing to tease out of what you said, because ultimately, in terms of everyone who sits the exam and even passes the exam, like there's only one best person in that. Like it's an unattainable goal. Even if you pass, you probably weren't the best. You were probably like just enough, and you had a wonky short case and a wonky long case. Like, it's so funny that we decide that that's the goal is very perfectionistic, isn't it? And then that can destroy, as if our expectation was to be the best, even if that's an unrealistic expectation in our minds. That's what we're going for, and everything else is falling short. I think it's useful to highlight where that's not helpful to us, and actually not even if you're going to pass, it's not going to be a goal. And I love that you just traveled, disengaged. Where did you go? What were tell me the highlights?
I went to Perth and I went to Rottnest Island to see the quokkas. So that was really fun. I would recommend if anybody wants to go.
So fun. And did you travel by yourself or did you go with people?
I went with my partner. It was still nice to have that support during all this time, because also I feel like it does come in waves sometimes. There might be days or weeks where you're like, I'm fine, I'm over it, it's okay, I've come to terms with it. And then you might read something, or maybe the work group chat and be like, hey guys, let's get a present for the DPs, and you'd be like, oh no, now I feel rubbish again. So it really comes and goes in waves. But it's that kind of comes and goes in waves, but generally on the decline. You'll start to feel better after months. It will just take time.
I love this breakup analogy, because I think most people can relate to having had a breakup, right? And it is a disaster. But there's also kind of toxic behaviors. It's maybe just me, but when you have a breakup, there can be little toxic behaviors in the aftermath of that, decisions you make that aren't great. So would you, it's just maybe in line with that analogy, maybe not, is there anything that's like the wrong thing that's not going to be good in that period where you are grieving? What should we not do? Like, text the ex? What's the equivalent in the exam situation? What is it?
I think in regards to that, what I'll say in general is that I've been through a lot of reflection, and I think there are some of my peers who have done more and have done less than I have, and it's not something that will ensure that you pass the exam or not the next time around. But what I've found is the reflections have helped me mature a lot as a physician in training and as a person. So it's not a tick box that you have to do to pass the exam the next time around, but it will make you a better person. And in terms of toxic behaviors, I think what everyone falls prey to is sort of clinging on to what went wrong on the day and how it wasn't your fault. So in my particular case, I had a geriatric GMET long case in the morning. I hadn't done a lot of those, so that was on me. But also on the flip side, I think the patient told the examiners a rather different history than what I got. So it's one of those things that you can't predict on the day. There are always things that are outside your control. And so I failed that long case, and that sort of tanked me for the rest of the day. and you can hang on to it. You can hang on to, this was unfair, I don't deserve this, I should have had a better examiner, that's not fair. I think you have to, like, being salty about it, I guess, to put it colloquially, is normal, but there has to be a time limit to when you stop going back to those sort of angry messages and sort of come to terms with whatever has happened, fair or not, and you just have to move on with it. And I don't feel that it's particularly useful to continue to have that chip on your shoulder, because then you keep coming back to it, and it colors a lot of your prep the second time around as well, and what you might say to your friends when you're prepping the second time around.
That is such good advice. And I guess anger is a helpful emotion at some stages, and it's part of the stages of grief, but there's a stage beyond that, and it's just making sure you get beyond it, isn't it? And tell me about that, because I'm fascinated by, so you're saying that you did reflect on things, you managed to let go of that anger, and I love that you're bringing those thoughts to us as completely normal thoughts, like it's, that is the the normal thought pattern, and to be able to let those go and then move on to a new season. How did you do that? You mentioned that you got some formal support and things, but I guess I'm just thinking that you have successfully done this, and we obviously were involved in your clinical season. You were like on point clinical season. You were unstoppable from the start. So I feel like there's something in that to learn. So how do you make sure that you're set up, or how did you let go of the anger, like the actual process of that?
I guess it's a hard question to answer, because I don't really have a specific answer. I think it's a little bit it was just for me, it was logical reasoning of, I've always felt that you can't change the past no matter how much you want to. So whatever has happened has happened. And in my sense, because I had gone into the exam the first time around, and when I came out, I didn't really feel good about it. I thought that there was a high possibility that I had failed. After I got my results, it's sort of, I'm not sure why I felt this way, but in a sense, I felt like it was written in the stars. Like, this is part of my journey. And if I had to look back now, I think about it, how it's impacted my life. I mean, obviously there have been some, minor negative impacts, which is the reason why people feel bad when they fail, but it's had a largely positive impact. I feel like I'm a much better clinician and human being for it. And I'm a lot more humble as a person as well, because I feel like when I went into prep the first time, coming from like being a type A personality, doing well in school, doing well in, I guess work in general, you always feel like you have to excel, and when you don't, you don't encounter that feeling of failure very often. And I feel like I almost had to go through this experience of experiencing the failure, coming to terms with it, and it's just helped me mature so much. So in that way, I feel like it was in the stars, because that's what I had to go through to become a better clinician.
Yeah. And you can so tell that in the way that you're sharing your experience as well. It almost feels like a coming home to yourself moment, doesn't it? And all that.
Yeah.
You did have to suffer at some point, and then all those learning points, like I feel like people listening are gonna benefit from your experience, and it's such a generous gift, but it really is, it's generous to share all of this know-how. So it's just wonderful. And I guess in terms of the on the ground support you had, I always think it's good to have like someone who's invested in you, a real mentor, and those people can be difficult to find, someone that really has your best interests at heart. Did you have someone like that, or how did you find someone like that?
Yeah, so if I compare my two experiences across both the years, so at the place that I worked, we were allocated a long case mentor for the prep season. And so the first mentor I had, who was amazing, but I think this wasn't the right fit for me. Whereas the second time round, I had a mentor who was a much better fit for me. And sometimes that's just how it is. I think the ideal characteristics of a mentor would be someone who is, if they're actually involved with your prep, someone who is available is the main thing, because, it's not like all right, 8 a.m. every Friday, every week, and I have no other time to meet you. Someone who's a bit more flexible, someone who's available. Number two would be someone who's a good educator. So someone who does have experience, ideally, with this process of actually not just being involved in a clinical exam, but education in itself. And I guess point 2.1 will be someone who is who is involved with the clinical exam. You don't really want someone who is far removed from the process and is just doing this as a favor for you, for example, favor to you. And number 3 would be someone who is genuinely invested in you as a candidate, as a person, and who wants to see you succeed, because that's what I felt very strongly the second time round. And I also have a BPT supervisor who very fortunately happens to be a DPE who of the place that I work, who also was basically, very invested in me as a person and wanted to see me succeed. And you can feel that in the way that they communicate with you and they check in with you. And that is a huge support as a candidate, knowing that you have someone on your side.
And it's beautiful, isn't it, to have someone like that? And it's interesting. I think that's a really great idea that they get allocated at the centre you were at. I think that's really beautiful, because I think most people don't have one specific one and they have to find one. And it can feel a bit like taking up space and things like that. And I guess when you do have a mentor, even in that scenario with someone who's got your best interests at heart, I think the delicacy with the clinical exam, or certainly what I found and continue to see in people that I work with, is that it's a very vulnerable place. So you're you're learning something and it's very uncomfortable, and you're going into the ring again and again, and there can be a balance between feedback and criticism and just general self-esteem and identity. Can you speak to that in terms of how you hold space for that if you are a mentor, or how as a candidate of the exam you can get yourself in the right headspace for that?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing to acknowledge is that it's really hard to put yourself in the ring, as you say, because we don't get a lot of feedback, I think, in the way that medicine works. Like, sure, we do our term assessments, but generally that's all like, okay, yeah, you're going, okay, good job, keep going. There's not a lot of real specific feedback that we get. And then suddenly you're thrust into this experience where it's, you're getting hammered nonstop, being like, this wasn't good enough, that isn't good enough, this wasn't a pass. And also being thrust into the experience at the start of clinical where you're failing everything. You're not passing your longs, you're not passing your shorts, and you suddenly feel like a failure in your life, whereas you've been trying to be pretty okay before then, for majority of us, right? So I think as a candidate, it is hard, and there's no perfect way of doing it, but the way I like to think about it, and it was a lot easier the second time round, is that if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, right? You're there to learn from other people. And so that was something that I tried to take on board a lot more. But the other thing I did as well is that sometimes, when you're doing clinical prep, you're doing it while you're working part-time or full-time. It's a lot on your plate. And sometimes you're just not in the right headspace for a short or a long, or you're not in the right headspace to receive criticism, because you're just at the end of the tether. It's 8 p.m. You gotta find a long to do. You haven't had dinner. You just finished 12-hour shift. You got to present it at 8 a.m. the next morning. You're in a terrible space, for example. What I found useful the second time around is that I would just try and schedule in longs when I knew that I would be in the right headspace to do it. But this can be hard if you're doing it for the first time around, and you need to hit, you're trying to do more to get more experience. But if I knew that I was going to be in a bad headspace, like I'm covering met calls and I've just come from one, you're frazzled, just reschedule. And if you have that ability with your mentor, just do it, because you're not going to gain much you're not going to learn much when you're not in the right headspace. And I think, coming from the flip side, as someone who might be mentoring a candidate, I think it will be really important to understand that as well, is that, all of this is happening at the same time while they're doing a full-time job as a med reg in a major hospital or in hospitals. It's a very busy job, and they might not always be in the right headspace, and they might not always be in the right headspace as well to take the criticism that you think they need to hear. Because yes, I'm sure everyone's got things to work on, but maybe they don't need to hear it right now. Maybe they can get it by email tomorrow or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's so great, using your emotional intelligence. And I think one of the things that I find is not doing anything, just holding space for potential. That's all you have to do, is just see the person as their best self and show them that you see that. And that's it, job done. The candidate will just rise to that. And I love what you said there about, if you're not in the right headspace, just reschedule your long, like feeling empowered to do that. Because I think we feel like, oh, I don't want to, what will they think of me if I cancel or whatever, like the consultant. get upset with me. But I think there's so much beauty in not pushing. And I wondered what your perspective was on that in terms of being kind to yourself, not pushing when you can feel intuitively that it's not right for you. I guess it sort of comes into the burnout territory a little bit, but can you speak to your feeling on it? Because during the clinical exam, it's very intense and you can feel like you just need to keep going. I'll sleep when I die, type thing. Like, I think that's, to use your word. What would you say to people in this season in terms of looking after themselves whilst also gritting and working hard? What's your take on that?
With the second time round, the key for me was identifying what were the problem issues. And I think everybody who is resitting the exam, you need to do that, because otherwise you're just going to go into the second cycle prep thinking, well, what's going to be different? For example, I was told that I was at pass standard before I sat the exam. I had, consultants and people part of my BPT department come up to say, you weren't flagged as someone that we were worried about. We thought that you would pass. But this happened anyway. So identifying issues is really key. And for me, it was probably my performance anxiety, which is something that I'll talk about later. But in terms of how I approach the second cycle of prep, the actual steps that I took would be, I just focus much more on quality over quantity. So when you start, I think there is a general rule drifting around that you're going to do 20 long cases. I'm not sure if it's like just local to where I am or it's in the ether as well. But I had done about 25 to 26 by the time I sat my clinical exam the first time around. So I'd reached that target. I knew I'd done enough long cases. I had the experience. I knew what the template was. So I very much focused on quality. So I did 1 long case a week the second time round. And I limited that. And it's very hard as well because you get a lot of, FOMO from other people or people sitting the first time around who are like just raging with their, hormonal need to do more long cases. And you got to take a step back and be like, no, that's not right for me. So 1 long case a week, it helped a lot because I could time it when I wanted. I could do it hot. I wasn't tired. And I had a fortunate mentor who was very flexible as well. So that was good. And in terms of short cases, the place where I work at had a lot of short case tutorials, which was great. And, I attended 4 a week for the first time I sat, which is a lot. And, that took a huge toll on having to turn up to hospital a lot, even when I wasn't meant to be there. So I cut back on those as well. It did a lot more finessing as to what I thought was going to be useful for me. And I think just knowing what your limit is. And the limit's different for everyone. You might see people going much further than you'll be comfortable and you feel bad about yourself, but you have to have the confidence to say, no, that's not right for me. This is what I need to do to pass. And it's really just having that confidence in yourself to call it and say, no, I have a limit and that this is what it is. And I think a lot of us struggle with that, in medicine, calling what the limit is.
Absolutely. And I think there's so many reasons for that, isn't it? But it's such a beautiful act of self-care to know your limits and respect for them. Tune in. It's so beautiful. And just on what you said, so you said you did like 1 long case a week and you tried to do the amount of short case tutorials that felt organic to you, it felt right to you. Did you study with other people as well? What was the best way to do that? What did you find? Did you find that useful or did you like self-study?
Certainly the long cases, I had a really good mentor. So I just pretty much did only long cases with her. I think I did an occasional long case with 1 or 2 other consultants just to test the waters and make sure that I wasn't going completely awry. But I had pretty much full trust in my mentor that she was taking me in the right direction. But with short cases, I did do study with what I found was useful was a group of my friends who were also resitting with me. And we sort of rotated around the different sites within my hospital and caught up that way. But it's also good to do, I think, short cases with people who are sitting for the first time around, because you don't want to get stuck into the same group of people all the time, because then you're going to get the same feedback every time. You want something different. So a little bit of variety is important. The other thing I would say is important as well is book study. I think people always associate the clinical with a lot of in-person study, which is true. You have to do that, but you can also do a lot of book study, which counts as well. And you can do that from home. You don't need to be in hospital, because I personally find that being in hospital is a stressful environment. And even removing that from your study can help a lot with how you with the stress. So just doing book study at home, running through lists. I think I did a few Zoom study sessions with a couple of friends, just running through your short case lists and long case lists and things like that. So that was another good way, I think, to study but remove the stress from it.
It's lovely to get a break from that environment, just full stop, isn't it? Something else you mentioned was performance anxiety, which, oh, tell me about that, because I feel like that's so relevant to, it doesn't matter if it's your first, second, doesn't matter. Oh my God, tell us about performance anxiety. How do we deal with that?
Well, so I mean, my view of the clinical exam, it's 50% your clinical skills and knowledge, 50% of it is your performance, and 100% of it is luck, because something could go wrong on the day and it's completely under your control and you can still fail the exam. But really, I think a lot of passing the clinical exam is your performance on the day. And I had never been the kind of person who enjoyed speaking in front of crowds, drawing too much attention to myself, kind of introverted sort of personality, I suppose. And suddenly and it was fine for the written exam. It's just a piece of paper. But when you're doing the clinical, you're suddenly being thrust into the spotlight where, for example, a short case tute, you've got the consultant that you might want to hire. You might want them to give you a job in 6 months' time. And you've got, 4 of your colleagues, or 2 of which you don't know very well. It's a lot of anxiety there. And it's something that I hadn't really acknowledged the first time I did prep. I just gone, well, that's fine. People deal with it, so I'll deal with it and just keep going. And that's not to say that, you having performance anxiety is a barrier to passing the exam, or that you need, performance psychology or any kind of external input to pass the exam. But I personally found it really helpful when I recognized that I do have a degree of performance anxiety. I think, honestly, most people do. And because performance is so important for this exam, it really helped a lot with passing. And so what I did was I engaged a performance psychologist that was recommended by the BPT team from my place where I work at, that place also does is very experienced place, and he the performance psychologist I saw also does work with doctors. So I found that really useful. And I think I did about 8 sessions throughout the prep process, or even a bit before. And the things that we focused on were the thing that we focused on the most was understanding what performance anxiety is, and understanding that what you're doing with these sessions is not to completely relinquish or cancel out the fact that you have performance anxiety. It's to manage it and sit there with it and acknowledge it and still perform at your best, which I think is really important to say. You don't have to be, I don't think anyone expects you to be completely calm when you walk into the room, in another state with all these examiners that you don't know. You're going to be nervous, and it's about managing that anxiety and going, okay, I can still put this aside and I can still do my best and get through the day, which I personally found very helpful for my day, the second time I sat as well. So it was really helpful. The other thing I'll say as well, the performance anxiety performance psychology takes a long time to sort of build up and work. You can't really start it 2 months before the exam and say, okay, I'll be right before the exam, because you need the time and the sessions to put into practice what you're learning in your prep. So I think, if anyone were interested in it, starting early at the start of the prep cycle, or maybe if you're sitting again 6 months, maybe at the start of the year or something like that, would be ideal.
Like you say, no matter what you're doing, whether it's like a speech or, something, and then the clinical exam is a whole new ball game of performance anxiety. But it basically, to me, is activating your sympathetic nervous system, which is a survival instinct, and you cannot just switch that off in the moment. And it's very hard to override your sympathetic nervous system. So it's amazing that there is somewhere you can go to rewire and allow yourself to remain in control and calm. So tell us about that. So you did that coaching and sort of became at one with that, feeling the fear and doing it anyway, having that with you on exam day. Can you tell us a bit more about the actual practicalities of that? Just some of the, it might be giving away the secrets, but do you talk to yourself before you go in the room? Do you talk to yourself multiple times throughout? What's that experience like when you're coaching yourself in the moment?
Yeah, so I guess the things that we discussed that I found particularly helpful were the psychology of performance anxiety. And what we talked about was, it was a triangle, which I don't remember all the elements of, but essentially as I think myself and I think most doctors, we put we tell ourselves theoretically that your competence is more important than your confidence. But then we walk into the room and you don't feel confident, but you are competent, but that doesn't come through. So I think theoretically, if you ask anyone the question, what's more important, competence or confidence, they'll say, of course, competence is more important. But in the performance setting, it doesn't come through. What you think actually doesn't come through. So a lot of it was about teaching myself that I am competent, right? I am a competent doctor. I've done this job before. I've sat this exam before. I know what I'm doing. And that will shine through in my confidence if I just believe in myself, as opposed to the advice that you quite commonly get with the clinical is fake it till you make it. And what I would say is that you don't need to fake it, because you have every right to be there in that room as a BPT. What the clinical is that you're proving yourself you're proving that you're good enough to proceed on to advanced training. You have every right to be in that room. You have done the requisite training. You've done the requisite years. You're just there to prove yourself, So you have the competence already, and let it shine through. You don't have to fake it. It's there already. And that, I think, was the big lesson for me. And I found that really helpful. The other things that we sort of talked about were things like grounding strategies, when you're in the moment or about to enter the exam room, what you can do. A little bit of mindfulness, which I think, you can find a lot of information about now online, and you can do even that stuff with a regular psychologist who isn't, performance psychologist. Those strategies were helpful. But the most helpful thing to me was understanding that concept.
Oh, I feel like it was like a mic drop moment. So you don't need to fake it. And then you said it's about what you believe about yourself. So you believed you were competent. And I feel like that's like the magic antidote, isn't it? If you can get yourself to a stage where you believe you're good enough.
Yeah, that's essentially it. Yeah.
I feel like I don't know, that just really hit me. That was very striking. That was very wise, Elaine, what you believe about yourself. Because I feel like seeing candidates go through this exam, I think there are some who don't believe that yet. They don't believe that. And that has to be something you continue to prove to yourself.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Doing good shots, doing good longs, prove to yourself, and then really believe it and take it with you. And I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here. Is there anything you think we've missed? Anything else you'd like to touch on in terms of advice for this current cohort of clinical exam candidates? Anything that you feel like you want to pass on?
Essentially, I think the other points I would make is that, when you're resitting the exam, it is so much easier the second time round. It's not as burdensome as a first. Like, it is still a big burden, but it's going to be much better. So, because I remember thinking about sitting a second time round, and I felt like, oh, it's just going to be as crap as it was the first time, but it's so much better. So life will be better, even though you're resitting. Life is better, is something I like to emphasize. And another thing that I found really helpful as well with the second cycle of prep is finding meaning in the process, which I think I didn't the first time around. I just come out of written prep and pass a written exam, and then you just go. You got to do 20 long cases. You got to do four short case tutes a week. You got to hit this mark. You should be getting 5s by this time. And it was all about numbers. And I think that's something that a lot of, not a lot, but sometimes you have, senior colleagues sort of saying that to you as well, like, oh, you should hit 20 long cases before your exam. There's a lot of focus on numbers. And I understand that process, because when you have a big cohort of BPTs and you have lots of people asking for your advice, you can't personalize it to them. You kind of go big approach and say, this is what you generally should be doing. But on an individual basis, you should be thinking, what is right for me? Especially when you're seeing the second time round. So I think the second time around, I focus more on, what is right for me, what's my limit, trying to know myself more than hit specific numbers. And finding inspiration as well was, like I mentioned, and a big source of inspiration that I've already told you, Christine, was one of your Rock Your Long Case videos. And I can't remember exactly which video it is. I did try and go and look for it, but I couldn't find it. But you said, our job as a physician is to meet the patient where they are on their journey and help them get where they want to go. And you might not always be able to get them where they want to go, but, to help them on that journey. Like, that's why we do this, right, as a physician. Like, what is the point of doing, what is the reason behind putting in all these grueling hours? It helps when you know why you're doing it. And that really struck a chord with me. That was like a light bulb moment for me, where I was like, this is what the point of the long case is. It is to help our patients. And that gets lost a lot in the process of like, how many long cases are you doing? Oh God, I've got to get up early tomorrow to present this long case. And, this examiner is really harsh. Like, it gets lost in the process. And just remembering it when you feel crap as well, I think is really important.
That is so beautiful. Oh my goodness. I just, it's like another mic drop moment from you. But that is so beautiful. So finding meaning in the process. And it felt like you were able to, the second time around, zoom out and like you said, really find that the why of being a doctor, the why of wanting to be a gastroenterologist, which is your absolute future, coming back to that, finding meaning in the process, which is so hard to do, like you say, when there's all this pressure. It's a pressure cooker.
It is a pressure cooker. And also I feel like, when we do long cases, they always say to us, what's the bigger picture? What's the bigger picture for this patient? And you should turn that lens on yourself and say, what's the bigger picture for me? Why am I doing this? What is the goal behind all of this? What kind of physician do I want to be? So yeah, that was a bit meta, but yeah, I think it's important to think about that for yourself as well, not just for your patients.
It's beautiful. And you said it right at the start of this, when people say to you after the exam, you're still the kind of doctor I would send my family members to. That to me is always the goal. It's like, that's who I want to be. And I don't even know if I'm there yet. Like, it's always something everyone should aspire to. And it's so broad and it means something different to different people. But if you were sitting your clinical exam, but all you were trying to do was be the type of person that people send that doctors even send their family members to, that is finding meaning in the process, because you won't be so granular. You will be zoomed out because you'll be like, who do I want to be? Just like what you say. And it's so much bigger than this exam. I feel like, Elaine, I am sitting here like inspired. I wish you were available to me when I was back in the day sitting my exam. Past Christine would have wanted this so much. And I know that there's going to be so many people listening that are going to benefit from all the gold in here. And I feel like I want you to have a course that I can come to for my clinical exam, or just life, like just to tell me how to do life and doctor life better. You are a wealth of wisdom and knowledge, and you have just so much to share.
I'm far from perfect, but I think I've learned a lot, so that's why I want to get it out there.
100%. And thank you so much for sharing everything today. You have just blown my mind with all of the pearls of wisdom. Thank you so much.
There's just one more thing I wanted to emphasize before we finish, is that for anyone who's sitting the second time round, I think, I guess I should have mentioned it at the start, but you always worry about the impact on your future. You always think, oh God, what are people going to think of me? And like I said at the start, there will be a handful, very few nowadays, of people who might think, oh, well, they're sat twice, they're clearly not good enough. But majority of people don't view you that way. And anyone who's a mature physician won't view that way, because there are so many heads of unit at the place that I work, certainly, and I'm sure everywhere else, who have sat the exam again the second time. And like some of the physicians that we know, are someone that we know who's amazing and who does the rock your long case program as well, who is probably the best physician in the world, like not exaggerating, but exaggerating, not exaggerating, had to sit the exam a second time. So it's not at all a reflection of who you will be in the future. Right. And I guess maybe it doesn't sound that great coming from me because I've only just passed the exam, but I think if you talk to your ATs and colleagues and really knuckle down on, people who haven't passed the first time round, it doesn't negatively impact your future. Right. Like, yes, you have to do another year of, BPT, and it costs you a little bit more money. But I think you will, if you take this opportunity, you will mature and you will learn so much from it. It will make you into a much better person and physician. And that will outweigh any of the minor negatives that you have to go through. And this doesn't go onto your AT applications, or at the time that we're recording this anyway. I think from what I understand, I think the cardiology applications, you do have to put your scores for the clinical exam, but it'll be from the year that you passed. It won't be from the year that you didn't pass. So it doesn't matter. It has no, long lasting impacts on your career and your future. So that was another message I really wanted to get across as well.
Yeah. But not only that, like what you said earlier, it actually shapes you into a completely different person. And, arguably that's the person that can have the biggest impact in everything you do, regardless of what you choose to do with your career from then on in. You can have a bigger impact. You've learned so much. You've humbled. All the things that you mentioned. It can become a superpower as well. It can become an edge and a superpower, depending on what you choose to do with that experience, like what you're doing today.
Yeah. And all in all, it's one extra year, and it feels like, a mountain when you're watching your friends move on to AT training, and that's very true. But all in all, it's a year. Lots of people do take a year off, for example, and so in the whole scale of things, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, it's definitely not. And I fully agree with that. Yeah. Anyone who matters, heads of units, people who are going to give you a job, they're not thinking bad things about you. I promise you that. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Elaine, I have loved hanging out with you this morning. It's been such a joy.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me, Christina. I hope this helps, other people at very least. But yeah, it's great to, that you're using this platform for something like this. I really appreciate that you're looking after, BPT well-being, because I think we don't focus enough on it, and it's hard. So yeah, it's really great.
Yeah, honestly, I can't separate education from well-being. The two are, you can't learn if you're frazzled. When your sympathetic nervous system's activated, you cannot take in new information. Yeah. That is one thing I'm certain of. Yeah. So they have to go together. So more of us should do that. But no, thank you so much. So that was my conversation with Dr. Elaine Koh. I'm sure you'll agree she is an absolute superstar with so much wisdom to share. I really hope this conversation helps you as you work towards your clinical exam. Please feel free to share this video with anyone you think will benefit. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.
When we do long cases, they always say to us, what's the bigger picture? What's the bigger picture for this patient? And you should turn that lens on yourself and say, what's the bigger picture for me? Why am I doing this? What is the goal behind all of this? What kind of physician do I want to be?